Hey, Algebra 2B students. So for your very first chapter in Algebra 2B, we are going to review what we know about quadratics and higher order polynomials. Today, we'll set out on a journey of reviewing quadratics. So we're going to start with factoring. So I want to remind you, when you're factoring any polynomial, but in particular quadratics, you start with looking for a GCF. You see number one is GCF. Now, after you get the GCF or you determine that there is not a GCF, then you count terms to decide what kind of factoring should I do next. So if you count the terms and it's a quadratic with two terms, your only option is to factor it as a difference of two squares. If there's three terms, your option is to factor it using the AC method. Today, we're going to work on factoring out a GCF and factoring the AC method. And don't forget, anytime you factor, you can check your work by multiplying. So just as a big picture kind of thing, what we're going to be doing is solving, ultimately, quadratic equations. Now, we'll do that in a couple of days, but I want to remind you that there's four methods that you know for solving quadratic equations. In orange here, you'll see that one of the most common methods is to factor. But remember, we need the other methods because factoring doesn't always work. Well, the purple method is the easiest method, just taking square roots of both sides. But most quadratics aren't set up to just take square roots of both sides. So you have to divert to your red and green methods. Those are for the trickier polynomials. So we can always use the quadratic formula, but sometimes that's overkill. You don't want to use the quadratic formula if the orange or purple method will work more easily and more quickly. So quadratic formula is nice if you've got a calculator. It could be too messy if you don't have a calculator. And then we've also got completing the square in green. I love completing the square. When it's set up neatly, it's really faster than the quadratic formula. We'll talk about those in a few days. So, as promised, we are going to be factoring GCFs, and we're going to practice factoring using the AC method. And we'll practice again with AC method as well, and we'll hit difference of two squares tomorrow. So pause the video if you need to. These are the 6 problems that we're going to practice with GCF. They should go pretty quickly since you've seen this before. So on the first problem, factoring x squared plus 4x, I'm going to look at it and see that there's not a number that factors out, but since I have an x squared and an x will factor out. So that's my GCF. And remember, you're going to say x times what equals x squared? X times x. X times what equals 4x? X times 4. So remember, x plus 4 is the answer. And then if you want to check it, you're going to distribute. So x times x is your x squared. X times your 4 is your 4x. And if it multiplies out to what you originally started with, you've got the answer, right? Sorry, there's a glare from the overhead light. So then let's look at this next one I have queued up. Now, what I want to make a note to you is, if you lead with a negative, your GCF is definitely a negative number. So you always, if you lead with a negative, factor out a negative GCF. Now, is it just a negative one that factors out? No, because I see that 15 goes into both 15 and 45. There's no letter in both terms, so there's no letter part of the GCF. So it's going to be r squared, and then I have to have a negative times a positive to give me a negative. And so 15 times 3 is what equals 45. And again, if you check it, and I don't always write down the check, but since you're, just now getting back into school after a long break, let's do that. So that's negative 15r squared. And then negative 15 times positive 3 is negative 45. All right, on your third problem, I noticed that if you look at the numbers between 20 and 50, I can tell that 10 is my GCF. 10 goes into both. Since I have an x squared and an x to the first, I take x to the first because the largest factor you can pull out is the letter with the least exponent. And then the same thing for y to the first and y to the second. Y to the first is the most I can pull out because it's the smallest exponent. So then I know that 10 times 2 gives you the 20. X times x will give you the x squared. And it's just y times an understood 1, which you don't write down. I'm going to repeat the sign, positive, positive. I know that 10 times 5 equals 50. I know that x times an understood 1 equals the x, so I don't write it down. Y times y gives you the y squared. So I have it factored. The blue is my answer. And remember, when I check it, I simply remultiply. So usually the check I do in my head, and I say, yes, that's 20, x is x squared, and then y. That is my original first term. And then this is 50, 10 times 5. X, y squared when I multiply that out. So that is what I got there. So on my next problem, 5a squared minus 9, since I don't have an a in both terms, my only shot at a GCF is a number, but there's not a number that goes in the 5 and 9. So there's not even a number or a letter GCF here. So I'm going to say this one won't factor. And do you remember that you call any polynomial that won't factor prime? So it's all right with me on the worksheet if you just write down won't factor. It's also okay if you write down prime. If you're doing a My Math Lab assignment, they'll have prime as the answer. So for our last two GCF problems, don't be alarmed if there's 3, 4, or 5 terms to take the GCF of. It doesn't make the problem harder, it just makes it take a little bit longer. So look at your numbers. Do you recognize that 7 goes into all of these? Now, 7 times 2, 14 might, so I would check it, but I noticed that 14 does not go into 21 or 35, so 7 it is. Look at your x's. I've got x to the 5th, x to the 4th, x to the 3rd, and x squared. X squared has the smallest exponent, so x squared is what you take. And on the y's, you have y to the 1st, and then all the other y exponents are higher, so y to the 1st is the most you can take. So I know it's 7 times 4 gives you the 28. And then it would be x squared times x to the 3rd gives you the x to the 5th. And then it's y times an understood 1, so I don't write that down. Plus 7 times 2 gives you the 14. X squared times x squared gives you the x to the 4th. Y times y gives you y squared. It's 7 times 5 that gives you this 35. It's x squared times x to the 1st, which gives you x cubed. And it's y times y squared that will give you y cubed. Minus 7 times 3 gives you 21. X squared times an understood 1 gives you the x squared, so write nothing down. And it's y times y cubed, which gives you y to the 4th. And again, I always double check that I've not done something goofy along the way. So here I can see that I have 28, x to the 5th y, check. Here I can see I have positive 14, x to the 4th, y squared, check. Here I can see I have 35, x cubed, y cubed, check. And here I can see I have negative 21, and then it's going to be x squared, y to the 4th, check. So I am checking. Now I'm just starting to do more check work in my head. Now for the next GCF problem, we're going to use it to link to the next thing that we're doing. So sometimes your GCF is a binomial. So notice you have 3x times the binomial x plus 2 minus 4 times the binomial x plus 2. So there's an x plus 2 in both the first term and the second term. There's just 2 big terms. So the x plus 2 is your GCF. So when I pull the x plus 2 out of the first term, I would be left with just 3x. This sign, the minus, comes to the center. When I pull the x2 out of the second term, I'm left with just the 4. So don't believe I need that much room. And then you'll have it, and it will, this is where we're headed when we factor trinomials. So I want to make the link now before we do any practice with trinomials using the AC method. So when I look at this problem, I can say, oh, well, I need to factor it. There's not an x in every term, so x can't be part of the GCF, and 5 doesn't go into 39 or 28, so there's no number GCF. And because there's 1, 2, 3 terms, I don't do difference of squares. I do use AC method. So there's my thinking, okay? Once I decide there's an AC method, what I need to do is break it from 3 into 4 terms. Now we'll practice that step, but I need to go from 3 to 4 terms, and I do that by splitting up the negative 39x. So I will explain to you in a little bit what I'm doing when I break up the negative 39 and rewrite it as negative 35 minus 4, because negative 35x minus 4x gives me the negative 39x. Once I have it in 1, 2, 3, 4 terms, I'm going to group it by looking at GCF of the first pair of terms and then GCF of the second pair of terms. So I need to group it because there's 4 terms. So 5x is the GCF of the first pair, and I've put that here. And then 4 is the GCF of the second pair, and I've put that here. Now, this step looks like what we just did. X minus 7 appears in both terms, so I have a GCF that's a binomial. So factor out the GCF of x minus 7. When I pull x minus 7 out of this first term, 5x is left, I put it here. When I pull x minus 7 out of the second term, minus 4 is left, and I put it there. So there's the link to factoring the AC method. So let's try some problems. Pause the video if you want and copy these problems, because that's what we'll do on your scratch paper. So how do we factor x squared minus 6x plus 8? Well, it's not too bad. What you need to do is say, well, what do the a and c multiply out to? So your a here is 1, your c is 8, so 1 times 8 is 8. That's your AC. So we're going to build a chart of possibilities. Your b value is negative 6. So you may be thinking, what is she doing? Where's she getting the a, b, and c? Remember, we're looking at this as if it's in standard form, which is ax squared plus bx plus c. And those are the same a's, b's, and c's. I'm not sure if you can see that. Those are the same a's, b's, and c's that you would use in the quadratic formula. X equals negative b. You know the song, that one. So I need to start thinking about what are all my possibilities that multiply out to a positive 8. So I could say 1 times 8, 2 times 4, 3 doesn't go in, 4 times 2, wait a minute, 4 times 2 and 2 times 4 repeat each other, so I'm done. The only other option is to get a positive 8. I could look at negative 1 times negative 8 or negative 2 times negative 4. So then I'll look at which ones of these add up to a negative. Positive plus a positive and positive plus a positive, like 1 plus 8 adds up to positive 9. 2 plus 4 adds up to positive 6. So don't want the positives, but I said 2 plus 4 gives you 6. So it's just a matter of changing your signs and getting negative 2 plus negative 4 gives me a negative 6. So this is the combination of numbers I'm going to use. What do I mean? What am I going to do with them? So the x squared and the 8 stay where they are. All you do is you take that negative 6x and you split it up as in negative 2x minus 4x. So now you've got 1, 2, 3 terms, and you factor by grouping. So look at the first pair. Don't stick parentheses in here. Instead, put brackets or underline them. Don't stick any parentheses because you'll mess yourself up. Do you all see that the GCF for x squared and 2x is just x? times x minus 2. Double check this. That gives you x squared minus 2x. That's what you have right here, so that's right. Whatever this sign is right here, recopy it. Now, what's your GCF for 4 and 8? Do you see that 4 goes in both of them? And remember, if x minus 2 is here, x minus 2 has to be here as well, or grouping won't work. So double check, and you'll see that's negative 4x. That's right. And then negative 4 times negative 2 is plus 8. That's right. Now I'm to the part where I have a binomial, x minus 2 both places. So x minus 2 is your GCF. And then you're left with this x and this minus 4. And there you have it. Now remember, you can check this by multiplying everything back out. I usually do this in my head instead of actually writing it out, but you're new. You're back in school for the first time, so I'm going to FOIL method. First is x squared. Outer is x times negative 4. Inner is negative 2 times x. Last is negative 2 times negative 4 is plus 8. And do you see that that does, in fact, give you what you originally started with? So we know we factored correctly. I bet you're remembering this. I'm just trying to jog your memory. So for x squared minus x minus 20, again, I need to think, well, my a is 1, and my c is negative 20. 1 times negative 20 is negative 20. So your AC is negative 20. Your B value is negative 1. Now, guys, I'm going to make a whole list, but if you clue in on the combination of numbers early, don't keep making the list. Just go straight to it. The listing just helps you find the numbers, but if you can find the numbers without the list, you don't have to have the list. So to get a negative 20, I might say, well, that's 1 times 20, and I'm going to make the first one negative. 2 goes into 20, so 2 times 10. 3 doesn't go into 20, 4 goes into 20. 5 goes into 20, but guys, now I'm starting to repeat, okay, because I've gotten 4 and 5, 5 and 4. So once you're starting to repeat, you can stop the list, okay? So when you add these, negative 1 plus 20 is positive 19. No. Negative 2 plus 10 is positive 8. No. Negative 4 plus 5 is positive 1. Almost. So I want to remind you that if you get the right number, but your sign is backward, all you have to do is change it from negative 4 positive 5 to positive 4 minus 5. And then you'll have it. Okay? So if you get the right number, but the wrong signs, just flip your signs. So again, now that I've got it, what do I do with it? Recopy the x squared, break up the negative 1x into positive 4x minus 5x, and then just recopy the minus 20. So now you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. You're going to group it. So group it with first pair, second pair. So underline your pairs. Don't stick parentheses in the problem. Parentheses means you're to the multiply step of the problem and you're not yet. So what's the GCF for x squared and 4x? X times x plus 4. Whatever this sign is in the middle, recopy it. What's the GCF for 5 and 20? 5. Now, if this is x plus 4, that has to be x plus 4 as well. Now, I always stop right here and say x squared plus 4x, check. Negative 5x, check. Negative 20, check. So I'm remultiplying things as I go to make sure I've not made a mistake along the way. Then I noticed I have an x plus 4 in the first and the second terms. So that's your GCF. And you're left with a 1x here and a minus 5 there. And then I could FOIL this out to check it. So last basic problem, guys, when you look at this, don't get worried that there's 2 letters in this problem. It's not harder, okay? You got to be a little careful, but it's not really harder. So I'm still going to go to AC method and say, well, my A and C are 1 and negative 18. So I've got negative 18. My B value is the positive 7. So I could have, to get a negative 18, I have to have one positive, one negative. So I could have negative 1 times positive 18. 2 goes into 18. So it would be negative 2 positive 9. 3 goes into 18. So negative 3 positive 6. 4 does not go in. 5 does not go in. 6 goes in, but when you do 6, it's 6 times 3, and you're starting to repeat. So there's really only 3 options. So when I add negative 1 plus 18, that's 17. No. When I add negative 2 and 9, I get positive 7. That's what I wanted. I wanted a positive 7, so I don't even have to flip-flop my signs. I've got the right signs. So specifically, negative 2 plus 9 equals positive 7. So remember, the x squared I recopy. The 7xy I want to break apart. So I want to break it apart in the negative 2xy plus 9xy. So if that's an xy, you got xy's in both of those places too. Minus 18y squared. So I've got 4 terms. I group it. First and second, third and fourth. That's the way I'm going to pair the terms. What's the GCF for x squared and 2xy? Just x. And it's going to be x times x is x squared. And x times negative 2y is negative 2xy. Whatever this sign is in the middle, recopy that sign. What's the GCF for 9 and 18? For the number part, it's 9. And for xy and for y squared, for the letter part, the GCF is y. And guys, if this is x minus 2y, this has got to be x minus 2y, because if these sets of parentheses, the binomials, don't match, then it's not working for you. Grouping won't work. So when you check this, I do get 9xy. That's right. And I do get negative 18yy or negative 18y squared. So that's right. And then my GCF is x minus 2y, because that's the binomial or the set of parentheses that shows up both times. What's left in the first is just the single x. What's left over here is the single plus 9y. And you're done. So even with 2 letters, the process is not more difficult. So we're going to finish up this little lesson, and I hope it's feeling familiar to you, but I want you to spend less time watching a video and more time just practicing and getting faster again, because it's going to take you a while to build your speed since you've been about 6 months out of practice. But copy these 2 problems, pause the video if you need to, and then we're going to finish up. So what's special about these is we need to actually think through all the process. So remember, when you're factoring a quadratic in particular, but any polynomial in general, you always start by checking for a GCF. And I do notice that all 3 terms are even. So that means at least a 2 is going to factor to the front. So I'm going to factor out my GCF, and I'm going to get 2 times 1x squared. 2 times 3x gives you the 6x, and 2, I believe it's times negative 28 gives you the negative 56. Now I'll look at factoring again. Now it may not factor again, because it could be that the trinomial does not factor. That's a possibility, and we'll talk about one like that. But if this does factor, we've got to keep going. So I'm going to look and say my AC is 1 times negative 28 is negative 28. And your B value is 3. So I'm already on 1 and 28, 2 and 14. 3 does not go into 28, but 4 does, 7 times. This one had already dawned on me that I think negative 4 plus 7 will work, and that does give you positive 3. So that's what you need. So this 2 needs to be recopied. This x squared needs to be recopied. But the 3x, remember, we're going to break up as negative 4x plus 7x. And then the minus 28, you just recopy. Okay, so I'm going to say first pair, second pair. Now this 2 here, you just recopy. You've got to keep dragging it along. You don't do anything else with it, but it's got to be part of your work. What's the GCF for x squared and 4x? X times x minus 4. So that's x squared minus 4x. This plus sign needs to be recopied. What's the GCF for 7x and 28? 7. And remember, if it's x minus 4 here, it's got to be x minus 4 there, or it's not working. So you look at it, that's 7x, that checks, and minus 28, that checks. So 2 is on the outside, and on the inside, can you write all of this as just one set of parentheses times another? So I'm going to write x minus 4, because that's what's showing up twice, and then the leftovers are x and the plus 7. All right, let's try that last, a couple of problems. Now let me just remind you of something I said on the last problem, and I want to just show you more fully. If this had been 16 instead of 56, when you factored out the 2, you would have had 8 here. Then when I did the AC method, it would be 1 times negative 8 is negative 8. And your B value is still 3. So for negative 8, it could be negative 1 times positive 8, negative 2 times positive 4, and really that's all your options. I could make it negative 4 times positive 2, or negative 8 times positive 1. But here, if you say negative 1 plus 8, negative 2 plus 4, negative 4 plus 2, negative 8 plus 1, I never get the B value of 3. So what that tells me is that the trinomial does not factor any further. And so this problem is officially done now. You were able to take a GCF, but then you had to stop. So occasionally that could happen, okay? So on your last problem, we're going to hopefully hustle, and I hope you're keeping up on this, that this is starting to come back to you, even though I know you're a little brain dead. So on this one, again, I've got to practice all my rules, and my first rule is always to check for a GCF. So with numbers like 5, 55, and 120, I can tell that 5 goes into all of those. So 5 is my number GCF. But look, I have X's and Y's in every term. No, I just have Y's in every term. So I do need to look at my Y's and see what my GCF is for the Y's. So since y to the first, y to the second, y to the third, since y to the first is this lowest exponent, take a y out. So it's going to be 5y times x squared gives you the 5x squared y. 5 times 11 gives you the 55. I need to have the x here, and it's going to be y times y is y squared. Let's see here. I believe that 5 goes into 120. On your calculator, if you're not sure, do 120 divided by 5. I think you're going to get 24. And it's y times y squared that gives you the y cubed. So again, this is a problem with x's and y's. Don't worry, that doesn't make it harder. So I'm going to do my AC method. So I have a 1 times a 24. I'm going to put that down here. And my B value is 11. So for 24, this can be a positive times a positive or a negative times a negative. I can tell it's going to be a positive times a positive because it's got to add up to a positive 11. So I'm not even going to worry about the negative situation. So I could do 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6, 5 does not go into 24, and then 6 does go into 24, but it's 6 times 4. 6 times 4 is the same thing as 4 times 6, so I'm done with my possibilities. So these add up to 10, 3 and 8 add up to 11, 2 and 12 add up to 14, and 1 and 24 add up to 25. I need 11, so here's my option. It's going to be 3 and 8. So the 5y must be recopied. The x squared must be recopied. But rewrite 11xy as 3xy and 8xy. and then the plus 24y squared. So now I'm ready to group first pair, second pair. Remember, you need to recopy the 5y. A lot of times I go to brackets here, so so the 5y just is recopied, but the action's actually going on inside the brackets. The GCF for x squared and 3xy is just x, and it's going to be x plus 3y. This plus sign needs to be recopied. The GCF for 8 and 24 is 8. And I have x, y, and y squared, so I need to take out the y. And it better be x plus 3y. Before I go to my next step, I'm going to double check. So this is x squared, check. Plus 3xy, check. Plus 8xy, check. Plus 24y squared, check. So I'm ready to say, okay, the 5y I've got to recopy. Now, what's inside the brackets I need to make as one set of parentheses times another. I see that x plus 3y is my GCF, and I see that x plus 8y contains my leftovers. Guys, if you want to leave it right like that, that's fine. If you want to rewrite it as x plus 3y, x plus 8y with no brackets, that's fine. Remember, if you wrote it x plus 8y, x plus 3y, that's also fine. So all of your sets of parentheses can come in any order you want them to, but we always make sure that we lead with our monomial or our single term.